Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, August 6, 2013. Getting into the week, it's the anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima with Little Boy, the uranium bomb. And a lot of articles are coming out there pointing out that there really wasn't a need to drop those bombs on Japan. Japan was trying to surrender. The U.S. government and Great Britain were putting obstacles in the way of that. They basically said unconditional surrender, which included removal of the emperor, which the Japanese viewed as a living deity, and that was a non-starter. But Japan was saying, we'll give you everything, but we want to keep our emperor, which ultimately they were allowed to do. And we need to remember, for all the lies we heard about Saddam's nuclear weapons of mass destruction and all the lies we're hearing about Iran's nuclear weapons of mass destruction, in all of human history, one and only one nation has actually used nuclear weapons against the civilians of another country, and that is the United States of America. Now, with Japan destroyed and trying to surrender, why did they go ahead and drop the bombs? Well, Truman wanted to, first of all, prove to the world we really did have these things, and that the United States government was psychotic enough to use them. And that was the reason, to basically shock the rest of the world into going along with the United States in control of the post-war environment, primarily Bretton Woods, and to shock the Russians into silence, which of course led them to actively seek America's nuclear bomb secrets, which they got through Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. But the big lesson we need to remember, both today, which is the anniversary of Hiroshima, and Friday, which is the anniversary of Nagasaki, is, for all the talk about how we have to be afraid of all these other countries' nuclear weapons, the only nation to actually do it, to actually use a nuclear weapon of mass destruction on the civilians of another country, is the United States of America. Now, you're probably already hearing, this started breaking yesterday after the show, al-Zawahiri is back from the dead. He is risen, huzzah, huzzah. This guy has died and been resurrected more times than Jesus. And he's out there issuing a new al-Qaeda terror threat. And they're now coming out and basically saying that the reason for all the embassy closings and the preparation for war is they intercepted the chatter of al-Zawahiri talking with somebody about, hey, what are you doing today? I don't know, not much. It's Ramadan. I'm fasting. I got nothing to eat. I'm bored. There's nothing on TV. What do you think we should do? Let's go attack the United States or something. That's the official story here. That's the official story. Now, does anybody in this audience really think that al-Zawahiri or the Mossad agent playing him is dumb enough to give out this kind of information over an open phone system when al-Zawahiri has to know as much as anybody else? It is all compromised by the NSA. He's not going to do that. And because of our NSA challenges, we have in fact proven that if you write your own code method outside the mandated standards, that you can defeat the NSA's cryptographers for at least a small interval of time to carry out some kind of an operation like this. If there is, in fact, such an operation. And I don't think so. I think it's just pure air. I think Obama is going to ratchet up the war. They're tired of waiting. They're just going to say, let's just go ahead and do it. Oh, we have to respond. They're all planning evil things against us. It was only a year ago we were told al-Qaeda was shattered. Al-Zawahiri was the only remaining major leader of al-Qaeda, even though he'd been already dead a couple of times. And then all of a sudden there are these very convenient massive jailbreaks. And al-Qaeda is loose on the world. And they're, be afraid of al-Qaeda. Be afraid of the commies. I'm sorry, be Muslims. What is it this generation? My earlier generation, we had to be afraid of the commies. Now we got to be afraid of the Muslims. So it looks like Obama is going to really crank up these wars here. They're claiming NSA intercepted a phone call from al-Zawahiri saying, yeah, let's go do something bad. And by the way, do we remember how Reagan got tricked into bombing Libya? This was detailed by a former Mossad agent named Victor Ostrovsky. I think he lives in Arizona now. He's an artist. But he's former Mossad, and he wrote a book called By Way of Deception, in which he laid out Israel smuggled a radio transmitter into Libya and started sending messages on frequencies they knew the U.S. was listening, in codes they knew the U.S. could already break, could already decode to say, I'm Muammar Gaddafi and I'm coming to do horrible, terrible things. And on the basis of that hoax, that fraud, Reagan bombed Libya, tried to kill Gaddafi himself, missed Gaddafi, got his 5-year-old daughter. And this whole thing just lacks any believability on this whole thing. And they're ratcheting it up. They're trying to just make this so sensational people will go along and say, oh, it's got to be true, it's got to be true. And so now they're saying basically it's going to be attacked by suicide bombers with the explosives planted inside their bodies. Now, remember the crotch bomber and how little damage he accomplished with this bomb that was in his shorts because there was an airline padded cushion underneath it and him above it? Contrary to what you see in movies where people explode all the time, explosives inside a person are contained. Think about all those stories we heard from World War II or Vietnam where one brave soldier would throw himself onto a hand grenade and thereby save the lives of all the other soldiers around him. Bodies are very squishy. They're very pliant. If you put an explosive inside the body and have to leave room for the internal organs to keep that body alive, there's not that much you can put in there. They're just making it up. And I'm sure already the security industrial complex is saying, oh, we've got to have scanners that see all the way through people. And yes, it'll give them cancer, but anything in the war on terror. And so the U.S. is prepping preemptive strikes on al-Qaeda. We have to go after al-Qaeda. They're coming after us with suicide bombers with explosives in their stomach. Which is the same story we heard with Iraq. We have to attack them now because they're coming after us with nuclear weapons, which turned out not to exist. So the United States last night urged all their citizens to leave Yemen immediately. They closed down non-essential personnel. Great Britain did as well, and sure enough, we're hearing, U.S. Special Forces on alert to strike at al-Qaeda targets. Correct me a little bit. Isn't al-Qaeda the group the U.S. has been sending money and weapons to in Syria? And now they're the bad guys again, but they're the good guys over here, but the bad guys over here. They're just making this stuff up as they go along. U.S. warships sent off to waters off Yemen, U.S. Marines put on standby, and yes, the United States has launched cruise missile attacks and drone strikes into Yemen. It's already underway. Going to go into Yemen. Now, the leadership of Yemen is supposedly on the U.S. side. The people of Yemen aren't. And something tells me these drones are going to be killing a lot of the Yemenites and not the government there to teach them that they better just go along with the U.S. agenda. And we know why Yemen is important. Look at a map. Yemen controls the Gulf of Aden and that strategic choke point into the Red Sea through which much of the world's oil flows. If the U.S. is in control of Yemen and garrisons that choke point, they can do things like saying, we're only going to allow oil tankers through that are selling their oil for U.S. dollars. Things like that. Pakistan just got placed on highest possible alert as the biggest ever threat from the Taliban looms. So Pakistan's going to get hit. And just as we went to air, Peter King was over on Fox News screaming the NSA is tracking calls between al-Qaeda and people inside the United States of America. See, this is why the NSA has to spy on all of you. We're not doing bad things. We're not unconstitutional. We're here to protect you because al-Qaeda has assets in place inside the United States of America. They're just cranking up the fear-mongering like crazy. And the reaction I'm seeing all across the blogosphere, the foreign press, and the independent media is, come on, guys. We've been down this road before. And it turned out to be complete nonsense then, and it is complete nonsense now. You should be angry this government thinks you're dumb enough to fall for this over and over again. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to grab a couple of phone calls here. George in Hawaii. Aloha, brah. What's up?
Brother, what's up, Mike? How you doing?
Doing
Beautiful
good.
Day.
Yes, it is.
Hey, listen, I'm glad that you're on at this time of the day. Let me tell you why. I don't have to listen to Brand X on the other side of the dial. You know what I mean?
I understand.
That guy is a self-promoting...
All right.
Fool.
Let's
let me get that off my chest, Mike. You got to give me that.
All right.
He's a fool.
All right.
The other thing.
Yes.
You.
Yes.
You're very topical and you're very informed.
Thank you.
And so you come up with things that are interesting and novel and just they're captivating.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I like to listen to you. And the other thing is, I don't have to listen to the drivel on my local radio stations either. You know, the stuff out of Honolulu?
Yeah.
It's a lot of garbage.
Well,
anyway,
it's Clear
you're
Channel.
well-researched.
Clear Channel owns that station.
Yeah, I don't know who they are, but I don't like what they do. Anyway, you're well-researched, Mike. Your work is excellent.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a good fund of knowledge. You're articulate. And you're against Brand X, and I'm for you 100%. So,
well, thank you very
don't
much
stop
for the kind
now.
words.
As they say here, brother, give on. Okay, Mike.
Anything else? Okay, I guess that was it. We'll switch over to Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I don't buy into this whole they have to tell you what they're going to do before they do it. But with things like the Lone Gunman episode before 9/11 and Family Guy episode before the Boston bombing, there's something to it. And this whole world alert, terrorist attack, embassy closing is very, very reminiscent to the beginning of the Operation Blackjack that ran in the UK Guardian about 3 or 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember that correctly, but if you go back and read the first few slides of it, it talks about there being the world being put on a super high alert for an imminent terrorist attack, embassies being closed, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know what that means. I personally think this is all just to deflect attention away from other issues.
Well,
and
actually,
channels.
let me give you my take on that. We know a lot of people are always finding these very eerie coincidences in books and TV and film that seem to predict or forecast certain government deceptions, and they say, oh, were they trying to warn us? Actually, no. The people who work in these intelligence agencies are not very creative. And they will go and look for ideas. They go out and look for something in a TV show that people were willing to buy as a concept at the audience level, and then say, hey, if we do that for real, they'll believe it because they believed it in the TV show. In fact, if you go back to the book and the movie 3 Days of the Condor, it centers around a CIA operation that does nothing but read books looking for really cool ideas for covert operations. And we know that one of Obama's advisors, and I use the term loosely, in the White House, was this guy who's a failed novelist, where this novel he tried to write and couldn't sell was all about this movie that angered Muslims around the world, which led to an attack on a U.S. embassy, from which they got the storyline for this little PR stunt they tried at Benghazi. So I think you've got it reversed. I think the reason there are so many cases where stories in movie and TV shows from years ago seem to be predicting modern events is these modern staged events are basically looking at these TV shows for inspiration. What can we get away with? And I think that's more likely an explanation for what's going on.
I think that's somewhat of an explanation, but when you look at things like the movie Knowing, having almost the exact same footage and exact same announcing news broadcast of the oil spill in the Gulf, and like I said before, the Lone Gunman pilot episode being about flying planes into the World Trade Center under a false flag attack.
Well, that was a common theme, not just Lone Gunman. I mean, it was even on the page of some of the terror planning manuals the U.S. government put out. I mean, it was an obvious target. It's not like it was an idea that didn't occur to anybody thinking, if I was a terrorist aiming at New York, what would I hit? Oh, I'm going to go for those really two big buildings over there. And as far as the footage in Knowing looking like the Gulf oil fire, I mean, what's a Gulf oil fire look like? It's a platform on fire in a bunch of water, so it all inevitably does look the same. I think you're reading more into it than is really there, okay? So,
well, I think this is something that we'll differ on. I think there is something to be said for reading between the lines and for those who have eyes to see.
Well, I'm too busy reading the lines. So thank you very much for the phone call, Kyle. We're going to let you go and head on back to the situation here with this latest piece of USDA choice bovine excrement they are serving us all up for dinner, that the NSA, which, they're the good guys now. All of a sudden, they're the good guys. Yes, they were violating the Constitution and spying on law-abiding citizens and everything, but now they're the good guys because they caught al-Zawahiri back from the dead on a phone call, just chatting up with other people about how we're going to go and do suicide bombings, people with bombs hidden inside their bodies, surgically implanted or some other way, which begs the question, how are they going to set the thing off? They're going to have some kind of a detonator or something which is going to be outside the body and therefore detectable, we hope, by the TSA when they're not too busy ogling the really cute young ladies in the X-ray scans or looting your luggage for your latest iPad. Now, Glenn Greenwald is out there basically saying the same thing that we were saying before the bomb stopped falling on Yemen, that all of these embassy closings look like a ploy to silence criticism of the NSA. And he is absolutely right. The timing is just too convenient. And we have seen the White House just in thrash mode ever since Floodgate started to break. And it's the NSA scandal, PRISM scandal, Department of Justice going after reporters, IRS targeting political dissidents, and it goes on and on and on and on. And so Obama was desperate for a distraction, even if he has to make it up himself, and that's exactly what the world's media seems to be viewing this as. We're going to make the NSA look like the good guys because they spotted al-Zawahiri back from the grave talking on an open phone line with his associates about all these evil, dastardly plots. And then the U.S. is going to use those as an excuse to basically accelerate the war agenda. Because remember, when General Wesley Clark blew the whistle on this grand plan to reconquer the Middle East oil countries, bring them back to the petrodollar, the plan was supposed to be over in 2008 with the conquest of Iran. We're now in 2013. They're still thrashing around in Syria. It looks like they're losing Syria. Already we're seeing the new governments of Afghanistan and Iraq straining at the leash, trying to break away. And so Obama may have just decided now's the time to crank this thing up. They're going to go into Yemen, maybe Pakistan. They may go ahead and attack Syria, saying, oh, it's a hotbed of terrorism. There's Al-Qaeda all over Syria. Yeah, they're there because you hired and put them there. Well, that's beside the point. We've got to get Al-Qaeda. So we may be seeing the beginning of a major, major escalation leading to the long-lusted-for war with Iran, which will bring Russia and China in on the other side, and will be in World War III for real. All to serve the money junkies. That's what it's all about, trading the lives of millions of your children to keep forcing private central banking's Ponzi scheme on the entire planet. That's what this is all about. Ron Paul, of course, is remaining highly visible since he got the old heave-ho from the 2012 campaign, and he's out there saying, why won't they tell us the truth about NSA spying? Well, because, to paraphrase that old saying, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. Because Americans are already asking, why is the NSA spying on Americans when we were told those evil Arab Muslims did 9/11? More when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Ron Paul is out there asking, why won't they tell the American people the truth about NSA spying? Obviously, they understand the American people are very upset that everything they do is being watched. Your phone calls are being recorded. It's not just the metadata. We've had more whistleblowers come forward on that one. They're scanning your email. They're breaking into your computers. They've hijacked Tor. The entire internet computer system is compromised, and all of it is unconstitutional. It's a violation of the Fourth Amendment, your right to privacy. It's a violation of the Fifth Amendment provision that they can't use your personal property for government use without just compensation. Those are your computers, your cell phones, your tablets that the government is using to spy on you. That's in violation of the Fifth Amendment. It's a violation of the 10th Amendment in that the government is not allowed to simply assume new power and authority over the American people. This government isn't playing by the rules, and the exposure of the NSA spying underscores that. And there's very little about the official story of the NSA spying that makes any sense at all. The government is claiming they need everyone's phone records because they want to see who calls known overseas terrorists from the United States. But if you've got the phone number of that overseas terrorist, you can go to the phone company and they'll give you the records. You don't need your own database. There's an emerging scandal where the NSA data collected in violation of the Fourth Amendment is being provided to regular law enforcement. We were talking yesterday about how the Drug Enforcement Agency is getting information from the NSA to shut down drug dealers who are competing with the CIA's ongoing smuggling operations. And then they have to recreate the investigative trail in order to go to court, because anything gleaned by the NSA's system is going to be thrown out of court. It's a clear violation of the Fourth Amendment. Now, if the NSA have all the phone records and bank account information and credit card transactions of every single American, and they do, why aren't they prosecuting all those Wall Street CEOs who openly admit engaging in massive amounts of financial fraud? I guess they're beyond the interest of the federal government, like real criminals and real terrorists. If they have all this information, why aren't they getting to these mass shooters before they engage in a mass shooting? I'm not talking about the one earlier today. That was a single gun. But these guys hyped up on SSRIs who were buying 5, 6, 7 guns in Batman costumes. Wasn't anybody flagging that? Rachel Maddow was out there with a show saying, yes, NSA data is being given to regular, ordinary street police for law enforcement purposes. This is a complete violation of the Constitution. They're not supposed to go on fishing expeditions looking for something they can bust you on. Now, not too long ago, and a lot of Americans, this sort of came and went without a lot of notice. The Department of Homeland Security has declared a Constitution-free zone inside the United States of America. Basically, it's a line that is 100 miles in from any U.S. border, and the Department of Homeland Security's attitude is, because these are borders where the terrorists are going to sneak across, the Fourth Amendment does not exist. This is why they are now having TSA grab your cell phones and tablets and laptops at the airport gates, and assuming they don't drop and wreck them outright like they did to me, they can just go through all your files, even though it is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. And I'd like to point something out to all your constitutional scholars out there. The Department of Homeland Security does not have the authority to simply ignore the Constitution. They are doing it, but that delegitimizes them. They are not a legal agency when they step outside that Constitution. And the real problem with all this looting of our personal electronics device isn't that we're worried about crime or terror. It's they're going to grab the data and use it for their own use. One of the biggest fears I had when I was back working on Lost, or in fact any project I work on, I have on my laptop, on my work laptop, I have images and videos of these film and TV productions that are not supposed to be made public. And one of our biggest fears would be that somebody at the airport would see, oh, these are behind-the-scene photos from the production of whatever it was. And I have a buddy who runs a blog that traffics in behind-the-scenes photos. I'm just going to send these over to him to help him out. And then I'd be in trouble. There's a reason we have this idea of privacy. You do not have a right to look at what I'm working on without my permission, and I don't care what uniform or badge you are working. By the way, apparently, we heard a while back that TSA actually rejects employees who score too high on the IQ tests, and I know that's true, because on 3 separate occasions, TSA opened and destroyed reels of exposed film from the TV show Lost, despite stickers on the outside saying, pre-cleared, exposed film, do not open, do not expose to the light. And apparently these TSA morons can't read, and they destroyed entire days of production, which when you're on a schedule getting a show to the air every 7 days, that's a major, major loss. Meanwhile, over in Germany, the revelation of the NSA spying, apparently the United States has now taken the gold medal away from Russia and China as the world's greatest spy and threat to personal business data. Companies over in Germany are scrambling to boost their data security. They're canceling contracts with American cloud service providers. In fact, there's even talk in Germany that all future meetings of the cabinet, the members of the cabinet will leave their cell phones outside as they talk over private German business. That's the reaction. And it may be an overreaction and it may not be. But what it tells us is this NSA spy scandal has already backflashed on the U.S. because those who do have something to hide are taking steps to hide it. One of the ministers over in Germany, the German Justice Minister Sabine Lethauser-Schnarrenberger, is saying that the European Union should ban all U.S. companies across the entire European market as being untrustworthy. And they're absolutely right. That is the demonstrated lesson from all of these scandals. IRS targeting of dissidents, EPA giving favorable treatment to green groups, Department of Justice spying on reporters, NSA spying on everybody else, PRISM grabbing everything that you do off the internet. The United States cannot be trusted. And we knew that back all the way at Seattle APEC when U.S. intelligence agents were caught stealing business secrets from conference attendees to give to political cronies. This has nothing to do with law enforcement. It's got nothing to do with terror because, as our NSA challenges proved, real terrorists and real criminals can easily conceal their communications from the NSA. And if they're using methods like steganography, they can conceal the existence of a communication. Depending upon how the message inside the image is encrypted, there is really no way to tell there's a message in there. It looks like the CCD noise. So we're already seeing articles in places like itif.org. How much is this scandal going to cost the U.S. cloud computing industry? They have put immense amounts of money into these cloud servers. They're gigantic. Huge investment going on there. And they're trying to loss lead people into it with here's free 10 gigabytes of online storage if you'll use our cloud server. And people are starting to say, I don't want. They're turning off the cloud connection from their iPhones, from their iPads. They're refusing to use cloud connections for anything. That means there's going to be no revenue stream down the road to pay back all this financial investment. These companies could be driven out of business unless they're being subsidized by the government, which makes a tremendous amount of sense, given how much they had to spend to set these things up. Now, another funny thing I've noticed that seems very contradictory to this idea that the NSA is watching us all for our own protection. It seems like ever since the revelation of NSA spying, the volume of malware prowling the net, coming into our mailboxes, has gone up. And if the NSA is really watching everything we're doing to fight crime, why are they not going after these malware scammers, cyber criminals? Apparently, one of the latest scams is to send you a receipt that you have made a tax payment to your local government. Click here for your receipt. People click it saying, I don't remember paying anything here. So who are these cyber crooks who are not only continuing to operate, but escalate, even knowing all of their online traffic is being tracked by the NSA? Is it the NSA themselves? Is the NSA workers on their weekends that are out in the garage launching all this stuff, knowing they're immune from detection? We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, yesterday we were talking about the revelation that the Tor Anonymous Network. Now, for those of you not sure what I'm talking about, Tor is a system that you can download where when you use your web browser to access the gardening page and you don't want your neighbors to know that you are engaged in gardening for whatever reason, and that's your own business, Tor will route your browser request through a large, constantly changing network of other servers. It's called the onion system, going from layer to layer to layer to layer and back, and then route your returning browser content back to you in order to make it very, very difficult for somebody to track you. Then it came out that there was a compromise of the system that had gone out where, in point of fact, information was being sent along with your packaging request that identified who you were and where you were and so forth. And then most recently, the revelation came that this hack, this compromise of the Tor, was phoning home to an IP which is known to be part of the National Security Agency. So the NSA's compromised Tor because they don't think you should have any anonymity and privacy. That's reserved to the government. You have no business knowing what the government is doing, but the government has every business knowing what you're doing, no matter how benign it may be, because they're paranoid. They're totally paranoid right now of you, the American people. The Tor project has now responded to this revelation, saying that you should disable JavaScript on your browsers if you're not already infected with this plugin. Disable JavaScript, and they're reiterating their warning that if you're doing something you need security, you should not be on Windows. Now, I know the Mac users are going to be happy to hear that, but I don't think anybody should assume that Mac is not just as compromised as Windows. It was only through an accident that we came to understand Windows was compromised by the NSA when they released a beta test version of NT without stripping out what's called the symbol table information on the compiled code, which identified what various memory registers were being used for, in this case the NSA key. I would presume Macintosh is just as compromised. They were just a little bit more careful about letting out the code, for what it's worth. Personally, I yearn for the days when you got your Linux distribution as source code and you compiled your own operating system to make sure it was secure. If you need to be doing something where you want to be sure that nobody is working on you, you invest in an old laptop. You can go down and probably find one at the local Goodwill or any other secondhand store, one that does not have Wi-Fi in it, or if it has Wi-Fi, has a mechanical switch that disables it. Because the newer machines where Wi-Fi is turned on and off under software control doesn't mean you're turning off Wi-Fi. All you may be turning off is that little light, and your own user interface to Wi-Fi doesn't mean that it's not out there sending packets. So you want a machine that is completely disconnected from the net. Oh, and something else you may want to think about. I know most modern keyboards, because I was shopping for a keyboard the other day to replace this one, which is just making all kinds of spelling mistakes as I work. And they're always pushing the Wi-Fi connected mouse and keyboard. But you know, that's a security hole, because somebody can be intercepting that Wi-Fi signal from your keyboard and determining what you're typing, including your banking account passwords. So go back to the old hardwired keyboards. Former CIA officer Philip Giraldi basically came out and said that at this point, many parts of the United States government are involved in illegal activity, and of course I would add to that unconstitutional activity. And that Constitution is the original contract with America. I cannot stress it hard enough. That Bill of Rights is there to tell the government what it may not do. Those are the rules under which we, the people, allow the government to manage this country for the benefit of this country and the American people. And if the government does not want to abide by those rules, they should do the honorable thing and abdicate. Because they're not a legal government when they operate outside those rules. They are not a legitimate government when they operate outside those rules. Their authority and legitimacy rests on that Constitution. And they either play by the rules or have the decency to leave. Of course, we know these are not decent people. They're true believers. We serve a higher purpose. The issues we deal with are way too important to leave to the voters. We have to protect the banks. We have to protect Israel. It's America's new century. We're the only remaining superpower. We should act like one. Which was actually the attitude coming out of the Project for the New American Century. That was their agenda. The Soviet Union is gone. We have free rein to conquer the world. Bring them back into the blessings of private central banking, Bretton Woods, and the petrodollar. All right, speaking of politics and corruption, there's a very interesting story over in USA Today where apparently dead people aren't supposed to vote, and we would think they're not supposed to donate money to politicians, but apparently 32 people listed on federal campaign records as dead have contributed more than $500,000 to congressional and presidential candidates and political parties since January 1st, 2009. 2016 is still years away. They're already campaigning. The TV network, the GOP is making a big stink about all these movies about Hillary that are coming out. You know, Hillary and Hollywood are very tightly connected with each other, and they're going to be just loading the airwaves with all these films about what a great and wonderful person Hillary Clinton is. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not going to watch any of them. They may be relying on the fact that everybody is so bored with everything else on TV because we've all seen it 20, 30 times already. How many times can you watch The Bourne Tedium? And they'll say, oh, it may be about Hillary, but at least it's new. We haven't seen it before. It's going to be no more real than Megalodon, which, by the way, is drawing a lot more criticism than just from myself here. Apparently down in Virginia, they threw a pro-Obamacare event to build support for Obamacare, and apparently only one person actually showed up. And by the way, have you noticed how the official story about the Tsarnaev brothers is mutating? Because when the Boston bombings were ginned up to remind Americans there's a terror threat and you should be afraid, and they were describing the Tsarnaevs as radical Muslims, and they had connections over there in Central Asia and the rest of it, and that account didn't fly because of the lifestyles of the Tsarnaev brothers, who seemed as Americanized as anybody else. So now the new spin is, oh, they're right-wing extremists. They think the government blew up the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. They think the government was behind 9/11. And they're raising on a busted flush with that one because most Americans are now very suspicious of the official story of anything. And they've seen the evidence for controlled demolition on 9/11. And I think these people who are putting out this propaganda are still absolutely convinced that they've gotten away with all their previous lies and they can use them as a foundation for building new lies. Afraid not. You're building on a foundation of sand. We're going to grab a phone call here. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike?
Doing great.
I just posted on there, and I just got a confirmation from somebody who works inside the Russian government.
Yep.
That they're using typewriters and they're using paper couriers for sensitive documents. They're not using computers anymore.
Yeah, we reported on that last week. Low-tech rules. You know, I miss my old Swintech. I really do.
Well, but yeah, I put something in there about a friend. He actually did it. He got an email from Nigeria about DVD rewinders. Stacked up on DVD room. And he put that in an old computer that the TSA confiscated. So if they bought into the lie and lost their money, I'm laughing.
Well, you know, it's kind of interesting because, again, going back to this idea that all of this bombing of Yemen and soon to be Pakistan and probably Syria and the closing of the embassies is based on this idea that the NSA intercepted the chatter of al-Zawahiri talking with his henchmen, plotting this kind of a stunt. Obviously, Zawahiri is going to know better than to use computers. He'll type everything up on paper. He'll have it couriered where it's going to go. I remember going into the war. Oh, we got to take a break, unfortunately, for news and station identification. George, you can hang up now, but I'm going to respond to what you were saying when we get back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here and responding to George's comments. Before the invasion of Iraq in 2003, because Saddam dared sell Iraq's oil for euros, the United States carried out a series of war games on just how they were going to go in and smash Iraq and take it over. And when they have war games, the opposing force commander is expected to do his best to win as a realistic test of U.S. military strategy. Now, you need to understand when you're going into a war, this focus on instantaneous interception, instantaneous response, is basically at the tactical level of managing the battle. But the overall strategy doesn't really change that much. And so what the OPFOR commander did in those war games was he worked out a very careful, comprehensive strategy. If this happens, do this. If that happens, do that. And gave it to all of his commanders. And then during the actual war game, he communicated with his commanders by courier, stayed off the radios. And he won the war game, which was a huge embarrassment to the U.S. But the U.S. went ahead anyway, absolutely convinced that Iraq would be using phone lines and radio, which unfortunately Saddam actually did, and he lost the war. But I understand Russia going back to typewriters and paper records. For one thing, paper records are actually more durable. This country is already seeing a major problem. I mean, businesses and government agencies that were storing their data on CD-ROMs. When those first came along, we were told they were just as durable as a regular CD. They would last the life of the user, and it turned out to be complete, advertising bovine excrement. And we discovered especially some of the cheaper grades of CD-ROMs being sold at your office supply place were erasing their own data after 2.5 years, including your business records, your tax records, your formulas, your processes. And that's been a real issue. You don't have that problem with paper. Archaeologists are finding clay tablets with recipes for beer on it from 5,000, 6,000 years ago. But right now we live in a culture where most of our day-to-day records are going to be unreadable just 50 years from now. Magnetic tape can only hold its information for 5 to 10 years. Hard drives are a little bit better. Solid-state drives are coming along, and they're looking very, very durable. But again, our future archaeologists are going to look back in history, and there's going to be this huge blank spot from the last few decades of the 20th century into the 21st. The only thing that will be left will be the war memorials and the statues to the everlasting glory of the conquerors. Now, I just got a very interesting email. Somebody wrote in to tell me that as a test, they took one of these 64 gigabyte micro SD cards. These are the ones the size of your little fingernail. You can hide them inside hollowed out nickels. And they put it underneath a stamp on a letter and mailed it to a friend, and the letter arrived unmolested. 64 gigabytes is a lot of information. So if you need to move data around and you want to keep it off the net and you don't mind waiting 2, 3, 5, 7, 9 days for the Postal Service, that's another way to do it. I want to talk about the economy right now. We had a story yesterday. Actually, I think we touched on it Friday, where the official U.S. government debt is hovering at $16 trillion. It's been stuck on the official debt readout on the U.S. Treasury Department's own website. It's been hovering just below the Congress-mandated level of debt for 2 months now, with no indication that the U.S. government has succeeded in balancing their books, meeting their payments, or no longer having to borrow. In other words, they're lying to you. Then we had a story that came out last week saying that looking at the off-budget obligations of the United States government, the real U.S. government debt now stands at $74 trillion, which works out to roughly $1 million for every American household. Most American households will never see $1 million in their entire lifespan. And somebody sent me this flashback article from National Public Radio in 2011, and their numbers said in 2011, the U.S. national debt was $211 trillion. They can't ever pay that back, especially in a financial system which creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt by design. And the time has come for Americans to decide, are we going to allow ourselves to be dragged down to abject poverty, starvation, and homelessness, trying to save a government that cannot be saved, doesn't even seem interested in being saved? Or is it time to cut our losses, hang on to what wealth we still have in our hands, and just let this system collapse? Because it's going to collapse anyway, regardless of what you do. There is no amount of work and sacrifice and paying taxes that you can do that will save this government, until this government decides to save itself by simply revoking the charter of the Federal Reserve and saying the debt doesn't exist any longer. It's the only way out. Interesting little statistic. This came out of treehugger.com. Everyone's talking about the revival of the housing market, and housing market is booming, and there's a shortage by now and everything. It turns out there are enough empty houses in the United States of America right now to house the entire population of Great Britain, with enough room left over to house the entire population of Israel. There is a glut of foreclosed homes on the market. We know that young people are staying with their parents much longer. As they come out of college with all that student loan debt, they can't afford to buy houses. And these houses are being kept off the market to create the illusion of a shortage to keep housing prices high. Because bankers want houses to be so expensive, you will spend your entire lifetime working to pay off the interest on your mortgage. The reality is there are plenty of houses out there they don't want you to know about. Because if those houses were on the markets, houses would crash down to $5,000, $10,000. And you could pay them off in just a few years. And bankers hate that idea. Bankers hate the idea of anybody living free from debt. Go back and look at the European press comments on Abraham Lincoln when he created his greenback. Just the sheer venom, the idea of a government producing its own money and being free from debt was just horrifying to them. The essence of all banking is to, I'm getting Peter Gunn here. The essence of the entire banking industry is to keep us all, whether we be nations or individuals, slaves to debt. That's what it's all about. Banking is the new enslavement mechanism, rule by imaginary debt. And it's no more legitimate than rule by divine right or rule by chattel ownership of your person, meaning slavery. And it only works as long as you, the people, believe this is the way the world is supposed to be. The people who were ruled by divine right believed that the gods had appointed their rulers over them. The people who were slaves believed slavery was a real thing, and because they were told they were slaves, they had to do what they were told. You are doing what you're told because you're told that you are in debt to the bankers, and your government is in debt to the bankers, and you as a loyal citizen will work and sacrifice your own wealth and the future of your children to pay off that government's debt. We're seeing that in Greece, where it's openly admitted that half of Greece's debt resulted from an underhanded deal between Papandreou and Goldman Sachs to conceal Greece's debt problem with a bunch of currency swaps, which made a lot of money for Goldman Sachs and doubled Greece's debt. And we hear from the IMF, from people like Christine Lagarde, that it doesn't matter how the debt came about. It is sacrosanct. You will work to pay it off. That is your role in life. Private central banking is slavery. Can't say it any more plain than that. We'll be right back with phone calls after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go to the phones. Robert in Missouri. Aloha, Robert. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Robert, are you there? Going once, going twice. All right, well, we're going to move right along here then. I just saw an interesting story come across my desk. This is getting back to the NSA spying. And, of course, when this whole terror alert closing of the embassies came out, the first reaction of everybody is, oh, they're just doing this to save the NSA from the scandal about spying on everybody. And now the new propaganda coming out is, oh, no, we didn't do this to save face for the NSA because the NSA had nothing to do with this particular terror alert. I swear they're making this stuff up with a dartboard. So we're back to the NSA spying on Americans is completely and totally useless, which is a direct contradiction from what Peter King was saying on Fox, where the NSA is tracking al-Qaeda phone calls to Americans. So the propaganda is completely fragmented and uncoordinated. They've lost the narrative on this thing. All right, back to the economy here. We're seeing a story coming out of moneynews.com where Raymond Learsey is out there saying that the price of oil is being rigged. Ooh, big shock there. They're rigging everything else. And basically saying that commercial crude inventories are near all-time highs. Domestic oil production is 1 million barrels a day higher than it was last year, and yet the price is going up because it's being rigged by speculators. Okay, Robert is back here on the line. Robert in Missouri, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
You got me this time, Mike?
Yes, you're on the air.
All right, cool. Hey, I wanted to talk about the embassy closings with all this quote-unquote chatter real quick. And what I find amazing is that you got all the usual suspects, both in the Democratic and the Republican parties, even senators like Jim DeMint, who I believe stepped down recently. He's going on the show saying, oh, the chatter is the same as it was right before 9/11 and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, really? What chatter is that? Is that between the Mossad, the CIA, MI6, and the rest of the intelligence agencies? Is that the chatter that you're talking to that was happening right before 9/11? I just thought it's, hilarious that these guys can come out here again on, the mainstream talking head media and talk about the chatter. And we know what the chatter is. It's intel agencies. It's not real terrorists. It's just terrorists that work for governments. I just
let me back off here again and tell you why that's so silly, because we know all this NSA monitoring has been going on since at least the 1980s with the Echelon program, and it's even more silly today. The idea that either intelligence agencies or terrorists or drug smugglers or whatever are going to be chattering using systems they know are being monitored without using encryption they know the NSA can't break. And you need to understand the real threat. The reason the NSA has been at the forefront of mandating encryption standards for the United States and the world is to make sure we're all using encryption where the method is known to the NSA. Because when you want to break a secret message, there's a two-step process. First of all, you have to figure out the method. Then you have to figure out the key for a particular message. And of the two, finding the method is the difficult part. During World War II, the Allied cryptographers were not able to break the German Enigma code until they got their hands on an actual machine. Once they had that, then they could start breaking the keys using this giant mechanical calculator at Bletchley Park. And so if anybody is out there using non-standard encryption, methods that are not complying with the standards mandated by the NSA, their communications are secure. That was the whole point of our NSA challenges. And if I know that, the real terrorists know that, I'm sure the U.S. government is not using the mandated NSA standard encryption. And so as a result here, I mean, this idea that they just happen to pick up al-Zawahiri or a reasonable facsimile thereof, just chatting over text messages or whatever, in some form that could be understood by the NSA, it's a ludicrous suggestion. Al-Zawahiri may be many things, including dead, but he's not stupid. And he, as well as everybody else on the world, knows communications are being monitored, and they're going to have some other way of coordinating any incident they're going to do. And on that basis alone, this whole blow-up about terror threat, closing the embassies, it's another propaganda fraud, just like 9/11 itself was. Robert, are you there? Did I talk you to death?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, hey, and I wanted to segue into one more thing. I read a funny article, and it was by, I can't remember who, I don't have my computer in front of me, but this guy said, okay, these countries where they close these 20 embassies, you know what they should do? They should put them in a cask, just like we did Chernobyl, because they're nothing but a hostile outpost of an occupying force anyway, so they might as well shut the things down and not let them reopen, because their country will probably turn out to be a much better place without this nest of CIA agents posing as, State Department employees and all the rest of it. And then the guy's just like, yeah, you might as well just put a big concrete wall around these things and the country will probably be better off.
Oh, I would say basically empty out the buildings and, turn them into low-income housing. Take all those giant file servers that they have there monitoring our data, put them on the surplus market. Probably much more reliable than what we're allowed to buy at the consumer level.
Yeah, I just thought that was a great article because I wasn't even thinking like that. And the guy's like, yeah, these countries that have all these embassies that all of a sudden are closing because of the terror chatter, they'd be like, you know what? They probably won't even get hit by any terror or anything else if they close down these embassies. So I just thought it was, rather humorous.
Oh, well, I think there's going to be some kind of an incident or several incidents because now the U.S. government has basically got itself into a corner. Because after all this hue and cry about terrorists and suicide bombers and explosives inside the belly and the rest of it, if nothing happens, then the U.S. government is looking like it cried wolf yet again, because we went through a period where there was a red alert, possible terror attack and nothing happened, and yellow alert and nothing happened, peach, taupe, and mauve alert, puce alert, and nothing really happened. And so I think they're going to gin up something. There'll be a big bang somewhere to say, aha, see, we were correct in predicting this terror attack. But that's going to backflash on them because what it's going to say is basically, You didn't have enough information to prevent the terror attack, which is what we were told all this NSA spying on Americans was doing. And so if there is another big bang, it shows that all of this NSA spying, TSA crotch groping, Department of Homeland Security scanning our mail, and all the rest of it did not work. Because we're not interested in having a firefighter stand there over the smoking ruins saying, aha, we knew what happened. The government sold us this whole spying infrastructure on the claim it would prevent terrorism. So now they're in a corner. If nothing happens, they cried wolf. If something does happen, the system doesn't work. And in a nation with an economy as strained as ours right now, let's start cutting costs. And I don't mean pensions. I don't mean education. I don't mean care for the elderly. I don't mean food for the hungry. Let's start shutting down these very expensive, costly government spy facilities, which clearly, if there is a new terrorist attack, do not work. You want to end terrorism? The best way is to stop messing around with other people's countries. Of course, I'm of the opinion most terrorists are phonies anyway. They're fakes to try and anger us against a designated target. Because somebody who's inside a country trying to bring about real socio-political change does not alienate the public. Because they need popular support for whatever their agenda is. They're going to be courting the public. They're going to be saying, we're on your side, we want a better life for everybody. So when you go out and you set off bombs and stuff, you're destroying your own popular base. And that's why I think 95% of all terror attacks in the world is somebody's hoax. CIA pretending to be an Arab Muslim, Mossad pretending to be an Arab Muslim. It's all theater. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Got a little more music to get through. And very telling song. That's from the last Great Depression. This is the new Greater Depression. We're actually in a worse condition than this country was back in the 1930s. Only had 25% unemployment then. Now we're up to 40%. And they're using the creation of part-time jobs to evade Obamacare to make it look like the jobs numbers are going up. But the actual earning ability of ordinary American people is being driven hard down into the Al-Qaeda at a time when the financial establishment and the government are demanding we fork over more money for absolutely nothing in return except made-up crises with made-up solutions like human-caused global warming. Give us your money, we'll save you from a broiling planet. And it's all made up. It's all completely made up. So they're trying to say that they're hearing chatter out there now that was just like before 9/11. Oh, then why didn't you stop 9/11? Because what you needed was a destroyed building to launch that century of war that the Project for the New American Century wanted. The World Trade Tower bombing fizzled. The building didn't come down. So wait a few years and try it again. And I think when we see exactly the same propaganda on TV again and again and again and again to scare us all into saluting the flag and throwing our babies to the designated enemy's bayonets, we should be insulted that the government actually thinks the American people are stupid enough to fall for the same lies over and over and over again. You should be angry that this government has so little respect for you. Story coming out of Penny for Your Thoughts blogspot. Apparently, Apple Incorporated is patenting a technology presumably to be included in all future phones and tablets that will allow authorities to disable the ability to send messages, tweets, take pictures and videos if you're in an area of concern, a sensitive area. Your smartphone cameras will stop working if you're, well, for example, you're watching the police shoot tear gas canisters at the actual heads of Occupy protesters. They don't want those videos to get out there. So if you're an activist, you need to find and hang on to cameras that don't have that ability in them. Get the little concealable cameras like the Luxies and so forth. Or a camera that doesn't go over Wi-Fi. You know, camera that takes an SD card, put a micro SD in there, take pictures of the government doing what the government is doing. And according to that letter writer, you could have a pre-made envelope and a stamp mailing to yourself. Just stick that micro SD under that stamp, put it in the mailbox, wait a few days, and you'll have all of your pictures despite all the government can do. All this stuff the government is trying to do can be bypassed, whether it's micro SDs inside nickels underneath stamps or developing your own methods of encryption. It can all be gotten around. And all the government is doing, going down this path, is sending the message to the American people and the world that, yes, we are now in a dictatorship. We are in the Fourth Reich. And it hastens the day where it's all going to fall apart. Because remember, the fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force it to act like one where everybody can see it. Alrighty, getting back to economic kind of news here. Over in Germany, very interesting story. 7 years ago, there was a man who came forward and tried to blow the whistle on his wife and her colleagues who were involved in banking fraud. And the court said, oh, don't be silly. Bankers don't do things like that. And they threw this man into mandatory psychological treatment for 7 years. He's been in a mental home for 7 years. As it turns out, yeah, his wife and her colleagues were committing bank fraud. And so the courts finally released the man and dropped all charges and said, we're sorry, you were right, we were wrong. But gee, how could you ever think a banker would engage in fraud? How silly is that whole idea? Probably because of this, we're seeing more and more reports on polls taken all across Europe that show the European people are as distrusting of their governments as the American people are distrusting of our government. Why? Because all around the world, we're seeing governments hand in glove with the private central bankers trying to force a permanent state of debt slavery on the entire planet. We're going to grab a phone call here. Jared in Washington. Aloha, Jared. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. How you doing today?
Doing great.
All right. Listen, love your show. Called in a couple times and just appreciate the work you're doing. Kind of want to jump off with, you mentioned the theater of the absurd going on with all the closures of these embassies and the terror warnings and how that's stimulating public fear to legitimize the NSA spying.
Yes.
So it is absurd, and people can see through that. The people who are willing to look past their own ego can see through this farce. My question to you, and you've kind of touched on this a couple times before, is once the potential, societal or structural collapse ensues, we're going to have to fill that void with the, hopefully, a reestablishment or restoration of a constitutional republic.
Yes.
What would be some of the steps that you would initiate if you had, were sitting in the Oval Office? I'd like to hear some of that, and I've got a couple of ideas I'd like to share, too. And first and foremost, I think it's turning off our minds from what I call the big con, or, the big corporate-owned news networks. So that big con is what is transferring their agenda into their own reality. We just need to cut that big con out of our lives. And how can we do that?
All right. Well, first of all, during periods of extreme social upheaval, it is not a good time to promote radical change to the fundamental structure of society. So when we talk about the blueprint for the new America, we would want to basically preserve those portions of our existing system that do work, going back to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and everything up to the 13th Amendment, I think is a good idea. We obviously want to go back to the idea of no private central bank being allowed to issue the public currencies alone at interest. We don't need to tear down the corporate media. We just need to bring back those laws that limited how much media any one entity could own in any one market to preserve a diversity of opinion. We need to transfer the authority of the federal government back to the states where it belongs, back to the people, where it was vested by the Constitution. We just need to sort of unroll the last 100-odd years of American political corruption. And I think if we present it that way, where we're just throwing out the bad stuff, but we're going to hang on to the good, and not get into this idea of, oh, let's just tear it all down and start from scratch, because most people during that period of confusion following the collapse of the current system aren't going to want to be thinking about fundamental changes to the way they view their society and their role. And we basically want to say we're basically restoring America to what it had been when it worked for the people. Now, what are your ideas?
Exactly. Well, I think, along the very first and foremost would be the establishment of the dislocation and destruction of the Federal Reserve system of fiat currency. I think putting that back into the hands of the public or, the Treasury is an essential thing to do.
That's what Ellen Brown was saying last week, that, there's nothing inherently wrong with the banking industry as long as it is publicly owned so that it is serving the public interest and not the money junkies.
Precisely, like the Bank of North Dakota.
Yes.
But I think that we should have, instead of a currency based upon nothing but interest at time intervals, it should be based upon energy production. And I like your idea with the electro. And if we coupled that with an environmentally stepped program of the decommission and then potential retrofitting or reconstruction of liquid fluoride thorium reactors to take away all of these aging Mark IV type GE reactors that are leaking all over the world. I'm just a few miles away from Hanford, and that is...
Oh, boy, I know right where you are. I mean, we used to live, my wife and I lived in North Bend, Washington, and we're a little bit further away from Hanford than you are, but I was looking at that site in Google Earth the other day, and it is just monstrous, and most Americans are not aware of this. That Hanford site in Washington State is the world's worst radioactive leaking waste pile. And it's getting into the Columbia River. It's flowing on down into Oregon. It's just a horrible, horrible situation.
I'm upriver in Leavenworth,
okay,
Washington, so I don't have to worry about the three-eyed fish yet, but they're coming, I'm sure. We also need to establish a massive public works campaign to get people working again, because concurrently in the establishment of the new America here, there's going to be the drawdown of the wars, the return of those soldiers, and there's going to be another massive need for jobs because, like you said,
well, I'm in agreement with you.
40%.
I'm in agreement with you, and the public works is not going to be gratuitous because the infrastructure of the nation has been allowed to decay to a point where, look at all these train derailments that are going on, reactor fires, and so forth that's going on. We need to rebuild this nation and rebuild its manufacturing. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Jared. We'll be back in just a minute. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. A lot of news today about guns and shooting. And, of course, the corporate media spin is, ooh, guns are bad, guns are bad. As I mentioned earlier in the show, there was a shooting up in Pennsylvania where a gentleman whose home was being taken by the local town council decided to shoot up the town council. And probably going to see more and more of that as people come to understand that the law is not there to take care of the people and their rights, but to merely grant the illusion of legitimacy to ongoing theft and plundering of the people here. Meanwhile, story down in Houston. Apparently, a man who had been subject to an armed robbery decided he was going to take responsibility for his own protection, acquired a gun, and less than 2 months after the first robbery, there was an attempt to rob him again, and he shot 2 of the 3 armed robbers, one of them critically. And this is a reminder. The police are never there in time to thwart a crime. Yes, they'll show up after you're already a victim. They'll gladly pose with your dead body for the newspaper photographers in their clean uniforms and shiny badges, but they are rarely, if ever, in time to actually stop the crime. The vast majority of crimes that are prevented are done so by law-abiding citizens with legally owned firearms. Yet, the current agenda of the United States government is that you should surrender all of your guns to not even have a right to protect yourself. They're trying to get rid of the stand your ground laws and force you to be dependent, there's that word again, on a police force provably unable and unwilling to protect you and protected by the courts. Remember that case out of Washington, D.C., 3 women sharing a townhouse, people broke in and sexually assaulted them all night long. The women had called 911, were told the cops are coming, the cops are coming, the cops are coming. Cops didn't get there till the next morning. The women sued the police for failing to protect them, and the courts ruled, actually, no, the police do not have a specific obligation to protect you if you're being attacked by a violent criminal or a rapist. They're there to hand out traffic tickets And to make sure you don't get too uppity when protesting in front of these banks, which hold the end of your slave chains. And they're paper chains. They're made out of those paper notes, but that's what the police are there for. Down in Tennessee, we posted this to whatreallyhappened.com. Apparently, this man in Tennessee had his handgun privileges revoked by the court, and the excuse given was he was posting YouTube videos the court did not like. Now, under the U.S. Constitution, the Second Amendment, under Tennessee's own law, you cannot have your handgun privileges revoked unless there is a crime, and looking at the court paperwork, it looks like this judge concluded posting a YouTube video was the crime. They're looking for any excuse to take guns away from you. We know that civil forfeiture is completely out of control. Story out of RINF.com. 5 shocking stories of police taking cash, cars, even inference from people never actually accused of a crime. Under the civil forfeiture laws for drug enforcement, if you've got too much money in your pocket, oh, you must be a drug dealer. And they'll take your property. They're taking homes. They're pillaging the people. They're plundering the nation and its wealth here. Another story coming out of Texas. Apparently, 3 women were pulled over and suspected of possession of marijuana. No apparent probable cause. The police did very invasive searches on the women, searching for marijuana, meaning up and into their genitalia. They didn't find any marijuana. But that's what's going on with the police force these days. They've gone from to protect and to serve to we treat you like a king, as in Rodney King. Over in New York City, their Department of Health building is now infested with bed bugs. There's a real confidence builder for you. Let's see. Getting on down to the Gulf oil disaster, and it looks like they dodged a bullet with that latest blowout when the undersea floor collapsed in and blocked off the flow itself. But apparently there is evidence surfacing that the federal court system that is hearing the lawsuits against British Petroleum for all the damage caused by the Deepwater Horizon blowout appear to be undermining the lawsuit in favor of the defendant, meaning British Petroleum. Huge amount of collusion to protect the corporations against, well, the consequences of their action. Got another one here. This is over at naturalnews.com. We've been talking a lot about Gardasil, this vaccine for human papillomavirus virus, an illness that you have a less than 0.1% chance of ever encountering in your life. There have already been stories about women given this vaccine suffering all kinds of terrible damage, including the destruction of the ovaries, meaning you are sterilized by this shot. And they mandated it for young girls, and it's supposed to be a 5-year shot, which means they're giving it to kids, and by the time they become sexually active and therefore theoretically at risk of HPV, they need a booster shot. And it's an expensive shot. It's like $300, and the doctor gets half of that for sticking that needle in you. They're financially incentivized to poke you with that needle. There's $150. There's $150. There's $150. There's $150. It's a heck of a business. And apparently, a new study that has come out has revealed that Merck and Company, which is the corporate institution behind Gardasil, did not research the effects of the vaccine on women's reproductive systems. It's not a case of rigging the tests. They didn't do any. They basically said, we're going to stick the needle in the test subjects. They didn't die. Okay, it's safe for use. Merck did not even do any trials or tests or studies to see if this vaccine was going to harm women's reproductive systems. They just forgot. Our bad. We forgot all about it. But we are not yet seeing any kind of calls for an immediate cessation of this mandatory vaccination while people figure out, is this really harming people permanently? And, in fact, we're seeing calls that boys should be given the shot even though they don't actually have ovaries or things that get this cancer. Now they're even talking about making it part of the vaccination of newborn infants. The U.S. birth rate has plummeted by 310,000 babies. This is out of the Organic Prepper, sourcing an article in the UK Daily Mail. U.S. birth rates are at the lowest point since 2007. They're saying analysts are blaming it on the economy, and yes, during hard economic times, people will exercise their choice in reproduction and say, I can't afford babies. But looking at the birth rate chart back in the 1930s, it's a slow arc. It's going up, it starts to slow, flattens, starts back down slowly, and then accelerates. The birth rate chart around 2007 is sharp upward, sharp downward. And that tells us something else may be happening, and not just the Gardasil. Remember, we have talked before about this very dangerous experiment with the epicite corn. This was a genetically modified corn that produces sperm antibodies. In other words, if you eat the corn, you become sterile. This was funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We presume there were test plots grown all over the area where this was being developed, and the genes from that corn spread on the wind the same way that Monsanto wheat, GMO wheat, spread from their test plots to contaminate fields up in Oregon. If this epicite gene has broken into the wild, which seems likely, we could be looking at an extinction level event, as all of a sudden we're not able to have babies any longer. I'm sure by now Monsanto's already producing their Roundup Ready human baby. So if you're a family and you meet the economic requirements and you have a good credit rating, they'll sell you a brand new baby on credit. We'll be back after news and commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, hour number 3. And corporate media has drifted off onto Obama's new mortgage relief plan. Now, remember, the last mortgage relief plan didn't really provide very much relief at all. In fact, that mortgage relief plan was actually used to drag more homeowners into foreclosure. Now, the big points of his new plan are to encourage fixed-rate mortgages over variable rate, which that I will grant you is a good idea. They're still talking about 30-year mortgages. They're going to phase out Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Not a word about allowing housing prices to come down because of that surplus of empty houses being kept off the market. That is what would really help Americans. But his mortgage relief program is just another way to keep shoveling us into the slavery of the bankers, who cannot stand to see anybody living free from debt. Probably Obama decided to put this out here now when everybody's watching the bombs falling over in Yemen. And yes, now the corporate media is reporting on that. Figures it'll pass without too much scrutiny. It's just another giveaway to the financial interest like Obamacare. By the way, Dan the Man is now in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. All righty, moving right along here. Getting back to science and health issues, we were talking about how Merck and company just sort of forgot to see if their Gardasil vaccine was causing reproductive harm to the girls it was given to, and now it's surfacing that, yes, a lot of women who've been given this vaccine will never, ever be allowed to have children. So what is the FDA doing as more and more of these scandals surface about drugs that are doing more harm than good? Well, they've come up with a new category of medication called breakthrough therapy, which will allow these new medicines to be fast-tracked to market with almost no testing at all. We don't want to test these medicines. We don't like what the tests are showing. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Jenny McCarthy. Jenny McCarthy is a woman who had a son who was vaccinated for all the required vaccinations and promptly developed autism. And ever since then, she has been waging a one-woman campaign about the need to determine once and for all if this epidemic of autism that is striking American children is linked to these chemicals in these vaccines, primarily the mercury-based preservative thimerosal. There was a lot of research being done, but in the Homeland Security Act that created the Department of Homeland Security, there was a rider that indemnified vaccine manufacturers from being sued for the harm any of their products caused under the rationalization that vaccine makers were critical to protecting the nation from biological weapon attack. And therefore, if that shot they give you for Gardasil destroys your ovaries, really you can't sue them. And so a lot of the support and funding for research vanished at that point because there was no chance of a financial recovery in a court action. But Jenny McCarthy has soldiered on alone for a while. Jim Carrey was hanging out with her and helping bring attention to what she's doing. Now, Barbara Walters has hired Jenny McCarthy for the daytime talk show The View, which prompted a firestorm of what looks like an artificially manufactured PR campaign to flood the executives of ABC and the producers of the show with all this mail saying, how dare you have this woman on the air there? Don't you understand? She's killing children by telling parents that they should be careful about vaccines. Which, of course, is the standard talking point coming out of the pharmaceutical industry. If you don't take all these medications, you will die horribly. And kids are taking these medications, and they are dying horribly. They're operating on the moral level of a traveling Wild West medicine show pitchman. Come in, tell scary stories about the scourge that's out there on the Great Plains, sell them a bunch of completely useless liquid, take your money and skedaddle. But it's almost like within our culture, under the current dictatorship we have, you're not allowed to talk about the harm coming from vaccines and pharmaceuticals, even though the commercials have that disclaimer on the end. Using this medication can lead to sudden unexpected death. Well, I'm not going to take that. You're not allowed to talk about the possible harm from Monsanto's GMO products. You will love your Monsanto GMO. You will love your Gardasil to protect the financial interests. And by the way, that is the classic definition of fascism. When the government abandons its role as arbiter between the greed of financial interests and the needs of the society as a whole, and when it aligns with those financial interests against the people, that is the classic definition of fascism. And that's not me, that's Benito Mussolini, who was the Olympic gold medal winner for fascism. And he was admired up until he got gunned down by his own people. In fact, in 1933, Wall Street financial interests attempted a coup d'etat against President Franklin Roosevelt to try and bring Mussolini's model of fascism to the United States of America, which it appears that they've succeeded in doing some 70 years on, 80 years on. But this firestorm of obviously manufactured protest against Jenny McCarthy is clearly the public relations firms out there trying to make sure Americans don't understand that a lot of the chronic illnesses we are all suffering did not occur in nature. We've all heard about peanut anaphylaxis. Terrible problem. People just exposed to the dust from a peanut just curl up and die. Go back and search the history of medical literature. That didn't happen in times past. It's brand new. And it came into existence at the same time vaccine manufacturers started adding peanut oil to their vaccines as an adjuvant, which is a fancy word for something that's going to piss the body off and trigger the development of antibodies. And it looks like what happened is the body was tricked into producing antibodies not only to whatever weakened pathogen was in the vaccine, but to peanuts themselves. And that's where that anaphylaxis comes from. Not to worry, they already have a medication to make it safe for you to eat peanuts. One of the components used as an adjuvant in vaccines, in particular the Gardasil vaccine, is polysorbate 80. It's a food additive. Like peanut oil, you're supposed to eat it and digest it, not shoot it intravenously into your veins. There is already a growing body of evidence that polysorbate 80 inhibits reproduction. So I wish Jenny a great deal of luck and support, and we know that she's up against some very powerful financial interests. who think it's perfectly okay to market toxic, harmful medications because there's big bucks in there, and if it causes side effects, hey, we've got more medications to sell you. That's the new model. Get them on that prescription medicine treadmill. Take this medicine for whatever we told you was wrong with you. Oh, there's a side effect. Here's another medication to deal with the side effect. Oh, that one made you sick to your stomach. Here's another medication to deal with that. It's all about the money. It's not about your health. It's not about your care. It's not about your wellness. All right, let's move on and talk about Fukushima, because that is becoming a major, major incident to the point where Reuters and Wall Street Journal are now starting to cover it. There are major increases in radiation coming out of Fukushima. The water they have been collecting, the highly radioactive water from the site, has now overtopped the original containment wall that they built, and it's flowing into the Pacific Ocean. Strontium is up 4,500% in recent days. Cesium up 1,500%. TEPCO says it doesn't know why the levels are spiking. And TEPCO, as usual, is lying. We know what's going on. Underneath that reactor, there is a spontaneous fission reaction taking place in the ruins of those reactor cores. That's what's going on, and they can't do a thing about it. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about Fukushima, which, even back when it happened, we knew they were lying to us. When Reactor 3 blew up, and they said, oh, it's just hydrogen. Nothing to worry about. And we called them on that, because when hydrogen explodes, it produces water vapor, and water vapor is white. And the plume above that reactor in the photo was this pale, sickly, yellow-green, which happens to be the color of the quadrivalent form of plutonium oxide. And so we've got a real-life China syndrome on our hands. The remains of those reactor cores melted through the bottom of the power station down into the ground. And we're getting these reports where the amount of strontium and other fission products is skyrocketing. And what that tells us is that somewhere underneath that reactor complex, one or more of those reactor cores have settled into some rocks. They're in the right configuration where spontaneous fission is starting to take place. Completely uncontrolled, no safety control rods, no scram, no nothing possible. Maybe it'll just burn itself out. Maybe it'll get worse. We don't know, and there's nothing they can do about it. And the containment wall, the water containment system they built to store all that highly radioactive water that they were pouring all over that thing to keep it under control, has now overtopped. And it's pouring into the Pacific Ocean. They can't stop that. It's a major, major... This is now officially, I think, the world's worst nuclear disaster. And a question that needs to be asked is how much of this might be the result of that Stuxnet virus, which we know Israel and the United States crafted to interfere with Siemens industrial controllers that are used commonly in nuclear facilities. In this case, it was targeted on the Siemens controllers that were controlling the spin rates of the centrifuges in Iran's fuel rod processing facility. We know Stuxnet broke into the wild. We know it was found all over the globe. It was just damaging factories up in Russia. Very unhappy about that. We know Stuxnet was in computers around Fukushima at the time the tsunami and the earthquake hit. And we know that the safety systems at Fukushima did not work correctly when the disaster hit. And it may be too late after all this time and all the intense neutron flux, but I think somebody ought to start taking those Siemens controllers and start seeing if the non-volatile memory still contains traces of the software that was in there and if Stuxnet was there. And it shows the incredible recklessness of the people who launch these cyber weapons out there. We don't care if we cause a meltdown at Fukushima. We don't care if we cause a meltdown in Iran's power station and toxify half the world. We have to win no matter what, because winning is all that counts. Victory or death. Other people's death, of course, but victory or death. They've got a major problem over there. And I think it was exacerbated by the fact that they basically stalled and tried to downplay it. Oh, it's no big deal. It would have been, I think, more advisable to have invested in finding some way to dig up those reactor cores before they reached that depth, and certainly before they started fissioning here. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Shannon in Tennessee. Aloha, Shannon. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I was going to talk to you about your story that you ran about the guy here in Tennessee who had a judge take away his Second Amendment rights because of a supposed video that he put on YouTube.
Yeah.
Actually, this story goes back a little further than that, and I actually just sent you a link or some links in to the full story about that. The guy originally, the reason why he lost his Second Amendment rights was because he had a mental health hold. A cardiologist that he was going to thought he had a mental issue and had him sent to a institution for some evaluation.
Okay, let me back up here a little bit. A cardiologist whose expertise is on the heart decided this guy had a mental condition.
Yeah, that's it. And I sent you a email.
I'm looking at it. I'm looking at it right now. But again, apparently the paperwork that is on display in this video, the judge apparently wrote in his own handwriting YouTube videos. And it looks to me, now the guy is colorful, there's no question about that. He wears this raccoon hat, and he's very colorful, and I think we could consider him eccentric, but being eccentric doesn't necessarily mean one is mentally ill, with mental illness defined as being a danger to himself or others. In fact, he looks like just a fun-loving Joe to me. So I'll look at these links that you sent me, but the whole point of the story is if this guy is showing the correct court documents, what the judge wrote was YouTube videos on reason for this case to be upheld.
Okay, well, and it may be that two of them are linked together, but I just don't think that you had the full information about the story about this guy's case, because it's been going on since early 2012.
All right, well, thank you for the added information there, but we have seen already where there's a tremendous push to use a declaration of mental illness as a reason to suspend people's Second Amendment rights. They're applying it as a blanket to all our returning military veterans, because when the federal government declares war on the American people, those military veterans represent an already trained military force, probably on the side of the American people. And so they're trying to declare everybody is mentally ill. In fact, there was one of the gun grabbers up in New York was saying that anybody who likes guns by default is mentally ill. And remember, all of this mental illness stuff goes back to that diagnostic manual, which is all subjective. There is no laboratory test that says this person is mentally ill. It is simply a judgment call by somebody. And in this case, we're dealing with a cardiologist.
Yeah.
Who is operating outside of their own field of expertise, saying, I think this guy is mentally ill, and referring him for treatment. So already this story is very, very suspect. We're going to let you go here, Shannon. Thanks an awful lot. I want to move on to some other stories regarding ClimateGate, because the carbon Nazis are still at it. They are still at it right now here, and the reality is, this has been, with July, this has been the Arctic's shortest summer on record. Temperatures are starting to plunge up in the Arctic early. Now, normally, looking at historical trends, the Arctic has 90 days above freezing every summer. This year, there was less than half of that. Now, part of the hue and cry about the warming world involved going back and sort of massaging history, doing that George Orwell, 1984, Winston Smith, we've got to change the past to control the future. We know that a lot of the carbon Nazis were going into Wikipedia and trying to re-edit the articles on the medieval and Roman warm periods to make it look like they really weren't all that warm and it was no big deal. We know they went in and edited the articles on the Little Ice Age to say it wasn't all that big a deal. And now it turns out that some satellite observation data from 1979 has been uncovered that absolutely contradicts the claim the Arctic ice is melting at a fast pace. In fact, it seems to be cyclical, periodic, and business as usual. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the carbon Nazis. They're still out there. You got to pay a carbon tax. You have to live simpler lives to save Mother Earth. And what it's really all about is taking away your money and convincing you to live in poverty and think it's a fashion trend so the bankers can have that much more. And all the dire warnings and prognostication by the carbon Nazis over the last 10 years have cratered. And a lot of people are asking, what the heck happened? We were in a warming trend. It was warming. Carbon dioxide was going up, and carbon dioxide is still going up, but we're not seeing all this bad stuff happen. Well, because it wasn't science, it was politics. Careful observations of the sun are showing that there's actually less solar radiation reaching the Earth than there was 13 years ago. Remember back when Al Gore was out there ridiculing the idea that the sun controls climate here on Earth? We know, because we've been able to study the sun scientifically for about 100 years, we know about the 11-year sunspot cycle, the 22-year magnetic cycle, but there are indications there are longer cycles at work that control solar output. There's been a lot of work done in Russia on this. And now they're confirming. Direct measurement shows we're actually getting a little tiny bit less energy from the sun than we did 13 years ago. And that's why the hockey stick never manifested itself. That's why we've had all these record-setting winters. That's why the Arctic just had its coldest summer season in years. The sun is the boss of Earth's climate. And so this whole propaganda about Arctic and Antarctic ice melting, it's in complete, total collapse. There's been a 15% increase in ice volume over last year. They were lying to you to trick you out of your money and your obedience, and that is all this government knows how to do, because it's all they've been doing for decades. And all the people coming into government, that's what they think they're supposed to do, so that's what they learn how to do, lie to you and trick you. Defraud you, deceive you, propagandize you. They don't actually know how to do anything. The original United States government was made up of people who had day jobs. Ben Franklin was a publisher and an inventor. John Hancock sold insurance. Thomas Jefferson was a lawyer. Paul Revere was a silversmith. These were people who knew how to make businesses work, knew how to invent and develop and build new things. Today we have a permanent ruling class of inherited wealth and inherited power that know absolutely nothing but how to look good on camera and write new laws to make up for the fact they weren't enforcing the old laws already in place. And this whole human-caused global warming was just more of the same here. And the hysteria is continuing. Over at the Daily Sheeple, they're screaming, a lack of water could cause the final collapse of America. It's official, we're running out of water. And yes, fresh water is in short supply. But you know something? If the world was actually getting warmer, the oceans would evaporate faster and more fresh water would be into the atmosphere to fall as rain. The world's oceans are the biggest, literally, distilling plant on planet Earth. We should be encouraging global warming, not screaming that it's the end of the world. Here in Hawaii, the state has fired an auditor for pointing out that a Chevron Energy project bid would cost the state $284 million more than a competitor. and for objecting when her bosses told her to destroy the audit that showed it. In other words, for whatever reasons, under the table money, political influence, whatever, Hawaii wanted to grant the contract to Chevron, even though they bid higher than a competitor. And the auditor who pointed it out was ordered to destroy the audit, and when she complained, she was fired. So even here in paradise, the political corruption is at epidemic levels here. You probably heard that Twinkies are coming back, but they're going to be a lot smaller. And that seems to be kind of a trend all over the place. Everything's getting a little smaller, a little smaller. If you have one of those toilet paper holders that only grip the roll from the ends, doesn't have a rod, goes all the way through, you've probably noticed the thing pops out a lot more often because the rolls are just a little bit narrower. Just trying to save a few pennies, keep the money junkies happy. I want to share a little story with you. The parable of the toilet, if you will. About 6 months ago, one of our toilets here began running and leaking constantly. So I go down to the hardware store, I say, I have this model toilet with this model filling system and this model flapper. And of course the hardware store said, oh, they don't make those anymore. You have to buy a completely new replacement for all the toilet's innards to fix that one leak in that one part, planned obsolescence. Or you can buy this little gizmo that has this little clay ring that you shove down on there to make a seal and put this part on, and maybe that'll work for a while. And it did work for a while, but started leaking again this last week. So I went and got another one of those things and put that in, and it's already misbehaving. And I began to think that's almost become a metaphor for the entire country. They changed the standards so much, you can't get parts for the old to force you to buy the new, and in this economy people can't buy the new, so they're making do with little clay rings or little pieces of duct tape. We're becoming a duct tape nation. And when you have a healthy economy where ordinary people are able to trade their labor for a reasonable amount of wealth, you can get away with things like planned obsolescence. But when the economy starts to tighten up, you find yourself with a nation that has literally been intentionally crippled and paralyzed with products that don't work, computers that are buggy, software that crashes, tools that break when you use them. And those grassroots tools that you need to try and rebuild the nation just aren't there any longer. Okay, we got a caller on the line. Brendan in Wisconsin. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Michael, speaking of planned obsolescence, my old Mercedes diesel, it just turned over 250,000 miles. And unfortunately, it needs a little checkup, but unfortunately my diesel mechanic moved to the great state of Hawaii, so I probably will never see him again. But,
well, when I see him, I'll wag my finger at him, good and hard.
His name's Luke. Anyway, I was wondering, you rattled off a whole bunch of different program names. Someone had brought, Prism was in the news. It was about 3 weeks ago, maybe even 4. Mm-hmm. And I was nowhere near a pen and paper, and I wanted to do some research on it, and you blasted through probably 10 to 12 different names. Is there, was that just off the top of your head, or...
No, it was from an article. It was from an article that we linked to whatreallyhappened.com, and after the radio show, I'll hunt that article down and bring it back to the main page. And the reason for all these different programs is, first of all, to obfuscate the true scale of the spying, the same way that they obfuscate the EPA land grab by breaking into little tiny programs. And, of course, everybody's fighting their little turf wars over these programs, and the attempt to correlate the data from all these disparate spy programs leads to error, confusion, and the wrong doors getting kicked down. We've seen some of the ludicrous things coming out of the so-called fusion centers, where they kicked down the door of this family that had an indoor non-GMO vegetable garden because the fusion center said, oh, they must be growing marijuana in their basement. They're buying all these things at the hardware store.
Yeah, well, you're speaking to the Green Bay Fusion Center right now, but I just pulled out a whole bunch of whatreallyhappened.com articles from 5 or 6 years ago, all printed and stacked up in my basement, and 90% of those came out to be true. So,
well, thank you. That's an endorsement I'll gladly accept. But as soon as the radio show is over, I will hunt down that list, and it may not even be complete or comprehensive, but I will hunt that down and put it on the main page at whatreallyhappened.com so you can make a copy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay. Getting a story out of WashingtonTimes.com that federal prosecutors have now filed the first charges involving the Benghazi terror attack against a guy named Ahmed Katala, the supposed leader of the Libyan militia believed to be responsible for the attack that killed 4 Americans. Now notice the words, believed to be, suspected. They don't have any proof, and as a result, CNN is actually reporting the charges are under seal. I'll bet they're under seal. They don't want anybody coming back and saying, wait a minute, back here in the charges you said this, now you're saying something else. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We had a little dropout on our RBN feed for those of you on Justin TV wondering what that strange noise was about, and I'm sure it's just a coincidence. Somebody was trying to DOS my whatreallyhappened.com server, but both situations are back under control here right now. Getting a story where the corporate media is now acknowledging there are drone strikes taking place in Yemen and Americans are urged to leave. I'm sure that's wise and prudent because if the government you're paying taxes to is spending those taxes to blow up people, the neighbors are going to basically not have a good view about that. It's kind of hard to see your friends and family blown to bloody shreds and remain entirely cheerful about that afterwards. But it looks to me like Obama has just decided now is the time to ramp up and escalate this war. They've been trying to figure out some way they could convince Americans to go along with escalating the war into Syria and eventually into Iran to complete the dollarification, Bretton Woods petrodollar agenda. And they just decided, let's just go for it right now. And it looks like that's what they're doing. We understand that there's cross-border shelling going on between India and Pakistan. It looks like they're really trying to really kick this off and get World War III going for real. Obviously, I'm opposed to that. In part, not entirely, but in part because I think ultimately the United States is going to lose this one. We don't have the manufacturing, we don't have the money, we don't have the manpower to sustain prolonged ground wars on multiple continents, which opens up the risk that nuclear weapons will be used by the United States again. And the other side now has nuclear weapons to send back. Now, I'm sure Israel would be perfectly happy if the U.S. and Russia destroyed each other in a nuclear exchange. That would leave Israel with their now acknowledged nuclear arsenal, basically able to project power over the Middle East, and by control of that oil flow to basically be calling the shots for pretty much the rest of the world. So Israel would just be happy. They'd sit off in the corner laughing and clapping. Oh, how easy it was to fool those people into blowing each other up. Because that's a hallmark of Israeli foreign policy, playing let's you and him fight, tricking others to fight your battles for you. That was behind the Lavon affair, behind the attack on the USS Liberty, behind 9/11. Get these other countries to destroy each other, and then we will be in charge. Oh, let's see. Going on down here. We already talked about that. Alrighty, let's see, going on back up here to the top. There's a very interesting story came out over at the Daily Mail where there's a program to run brain scans on prison inmates to see if they can identify some feature within the brain that will predict if they will re-offend. In other words, once they're released, what is the probability they will go out and commit another crime? I'd like to see that same test run on our politicians and our bankers, but I digress. Whether or not a released criminal will go back to crime or not depends entirely on whether there's an economy out there able to offer him a legal job. And if you do not have an economy that is supporting your current law-abiding population, somebody coming out of prison, no matter what their interior motives may be to try and seek a better life, it won't be there for them. So this is just another pseudoscientific boondoggle like phrenology. We're going to find a thing in the brain that says this person will reoffend. And it's complete nonsense. Yes, there are habitual reoffenders, but it's not the dominant mode in recidivism. There are countries that have true rehabilitation programs where the prisoners are taught saleable skills. And they come out of prison and say, I don't want to go back to prison, and I got this brand new skill. I can fix office copying machines. I'm going to go do that for a while. Not have to live under the stress of worried about somebody from the government kicking down my door every single day. Very bizarre story. This was coming out of CBS down in Dallas, Fort Worth, where apparently there is a restaurant down there called Redneck Heaven. And apparently the waitresses there are rather scantily clad. And apparently some people visiting from out of town saw the name Redneck Heaven. Ooh, that's looks like fun. Let's go get our picture taken by the sign. And then found themselves offended by the almost naked waitresses covered in body paint and pasties. And they complained. And the government came in and said, oh, yeah, you got to cover up your waitresses now. We can't offend these out-of-town visitors who drove into an establishment with the name Redneck Heaven and didn't realize they were going to be in Redneck Heaven. We live in a culture where too many people whose lives are not working for them seek personal empowerment by constantly finding offense with what other people are doing. We see a lot of this over at the gay bashing people. You know, I'm frustrated at work. I'm frustrated with the government. I'm frustrated with all this other stuff here. I'm going to validate my sense of self-worth by being offended by something. And it's a fool's errand, because no matter what you do in the world, there's going to be some idiot somewhere who finds it offensive. A lot of people find my website offensive. A lot of people find my radio show offensive. Out here in Hawaii, all of the clothing optional beaches were shut down because all those moral Christians who own bathing suit stores found skinny dipping offensive. You can't please everybody. Why should you even try? And so government's down there in Dallas, Fort Worth, telling the girls at this Redneck Heaven they got to cover up, got to live by other people's standards, not your own, no sense of personal freedom and expression. I think they should fight this on a First Amendment basis here. And remember, this is all learned behavior. Nobody is born being offended by nudity or by certain words or ideas. You have to be brainwashed into it. Somebody has to teach you to be ashamed of your nakedness. I remember reading in the Bible that was the serpent who did that. So for all those other people running around screaming we have to be offended at naked women down at the Redneck Heaven, whose side are you on? Are you on the side of the serpent? Because you're certainly acting like it. Anyway. See, if Nike got hugely embarrassed with this Panthers shirt when they put the wrong Carolina on the front. And this is what happens when you get your T-shirts made in bulk in foreign countries. Archaeologists in Turkey are claiming they have uncovered a piece of the true cross that Jesus was nailed to. And they're saying, legend has it the cross was discovered in 325 A.D. Parts were sent to religious leaders around the world, and this is how this part wound up in Turkey. Now, you need to understand, back there in 300 A.D., 325, right after the Council of Nicaea, Constantine sent his mother, who became Saint Helena, to the Holy Land, and it was she who walked around saying, Jesus was born here, and the crucifixion was here, and he was buried here, and this piece of lumber over here, that's the true cross. That's where it all comes from. Absolutely no provenance from any of it. It was all decided by imperial decree. And you need to understand something about crucifixion. They did not use well-hewn, smoothed pieces of wood to make the crosses. This was a low-cost operation. They would grab any old piece of wood, tree branches. People who were crucified were very often just nailed to trees. Or there would be a cross piece holding the arms, and that was nailed to trees. And they were reused over and over again. So the idea that the true cross survived or could even be identifiable was nonsense. If you collected together all the pieces of the true cross in the world, you could populate an entire forest with them. So this is the latest hue and cry coming out there. Oh, yes, we've proven the Bible and the Old Testament archaeologically. There's a lot of fraud out there. There really is. All right, we're coming up to the top of the show. Obviously, our concern is this whole claim to a newly discovered terror chatter is launching more wars of U.S. aggression, already in Yemen, probably Pakistan, probably Syria. It looks like this may be the big push. We'll be back here tomorrow here on RBN. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay skeptical. Okay, and aloha, America.